Ja, schönen Dank für den sehr interessanten Vortrag meines Vorredners. Ich fand mich da total wieder. Wichtig ist in der Tat, dass diejenigen, die mit Kindern und Jugendlichen arbeiten, sich mit ihrer Aufgabe identifizieren und es nicht nur
young people, it is very important to identify oneself with one's own profession. It's not just rules and regulation to respect. This is a very important prerequisite for anyone who has to do with individual human beings. And this is also part of the Istanbul Convention, as you will hear during my presentation. Today, I will talk about a topic which is extremely delicate. I've tried to be as neutral as possible, but in practical terms, we have a serious problem when mothers report cases of sexual abuse committed by the former partner. And so for a long time, I could not believe in what I read in statistics, because there is a sort of contradiction. The Independent Commissioner for Sexual Abuse of Children, police, etc., advise parents who suspect that their child has been or is being sexually abused to report this suspicion. And parents who do not report such suspicions expose themselves to the risk that third parties will do so, and that they will face criminal investigations on suspicion of violating their duty of care under Section 171 of the Criminal Code. And so they even run the risk of having their parental care withdrawn in this context due to their inability to raise their children. So we have to focus on this problem because mothers in particular, so mothers who report their former partner on suspicion of sexualized violence must expect that the accused will not be convicted in over 90% of cases. If children are below 4 years of age, well, they are considered not to be able to provide evidence. And there's no material to collect. And so DNA traces on the body of affected children, for example, can usually be explained by normal physical contact during visits or I don't know, well, they may say they used the bathtub and that's the reason for DNA traces. So that's the reason why suspects are not usually convicted. So after divorce or separation, mothers reporting such a case are almost always accused of wanting to take revenge on their former partner, want to gain advantages in custody, want to put pressure on their former partner. And I was really shocked because this is usually only an issue for mothers. Well, of course, there are people who abuse these reports, but not 100%, maybe only 5%. And these have to be punished. But why only mothers? And why fathers are not treated the same? So this is what really upsets me. As I already anticipated, here you see why suspects are not usually convicted. Well, these are just allegations, but we now have the following problems. Well, when a procedure, when a case is closed, this does not mean that the person is not guilty, but simply because it was not possible to prove the guilt, and so it is not possible to convict the person. And so when the person is released, or when the procedure is closed, people especially believe that the report was made unjustly, or that the complainant, the mother, is intolerant to the bond that the child has towards his father, and they are blamed for undermining the child's relationship with the other parent, who does not belong to the family, and so they are accused of alienating their children. So basically, the complainant is confronted with a dilemma. They may lose parental care because they do not file a complaint, or they lose the parental care because they file a complaint. And since the accused was not convicted, that person is blamed of being intolerant to the bond with the other parent. In Germany, there are no valid data in this respect. There are studies and analyses by specific but these studies were also criticized from a methodological viewpoint, and then we may have data from the people involved and coming from the court. So the problem is that we have no valid studies in Germany so far. And as we said, mostly mothers are confronted with this problem, and not so much the fathers. And this is really shocking. This was also confirmed through a study, which is relatively recent, carried out in the USA. And so in that case, in this study, mothers run 4 times a higher risk of being deprived of their custody compared to fathers. And this is the study that I mentioned. If you want to read it, it's a 2019 research study. It's relatively recent. The question is why mothers are those who are most exposed to losing their custody. You see some facts and figures. So you see that in this specific case, and in my project presentation, you see that as far as sexualized violence is concerned against the former partner, we also have a problem with domestic violence. So you see that if mothers were accused of having alienated the child from the father, they lost custody to the violent father, even if domestic violence had been proven. Here you see further data from the USA. And you see that the youth centers and family courts are also involved. So I don't remember, but I think that the data from Germany are very similar to this. So you see how many mothers lose custody compared to fathers. Here, for example, you see that, well, accusations by fathers are usually taken as a fact without being examined, but this is not the case for the mothers. So on this basis, the risk to the child's well-being posed by the mothers was then justified, and a step-by-step approach was taken towards taking the child into care, or at least towards frequent visits in favor of the fathers. You see that there is a gender imbalance in how mothers and fathers are treated. So if you haven't heard about this, please consider another important element. There is the so-called PAS syndrome, which is considered as a disease. And Gardner, an American researcher, codified the parental alienation syndrome. And mothers are usually considered as reacting hysterically when losing custody. And so we have been striving to have it recognized from a scientific viewpoint, but this is not a disease recognized scientifically. So the theory from Gardner is not scientifically proven and evidenced, but this syndrome is very often mentioned as a child alienation. And there are many people working in family courts and in youth centers who still consider this syndrome. There are a lot of information campaigns, congresses organized by fathers associations, and the speakers still mention Gardner and this syndrome. But you should know something about Gardner, and this is a great scandal that occurred in the 90s. He published books in which he said that there are no problems whatsoever if there are sexual contacts between children and adults in a family, and women usually react hysterically. And in Germany, this was considered as a prerequisite for taking the child into care and depriving the mothers from their care. And this concept of child alienation and intolerance to the bond has always been falsified and abused by Gardner supporters. When a relationship fails, we always have a sort of intolerance for bonds with the former partner. But in the majority of people, well, this should be considered simply as one of the reasons why a relationship failed. And so the situation has simply to be explained to the children, especially in the case of violence and assaults. So bond intolerance from the side of mothers against their former partner is a normal or even mandatory for mothers, especially in case of violence. And if you explain this as a form of child alienation, well, if you sexually assault children, then children tend to be silent and to consider this as a shared secret. And this secret is kept a secret to the mother. And for this reason, the perpetrator, the offender, wants to share a sort of secret vis-a-vis the other partner. And this deprives the other parent from authority. So the father would say, don't tell this to your mother, otherwise your papa would go to prison. And so this is something which has often been abused. And mothers are usually suspected of not being able to educate their children. But the sexual assault against children or against the former partner is certainly a justification for a bond intolerance. But this has nothing to do with the child alienation. So in a nutshell, in this slide, you see our requests. So we need family courts and youth welfare units that do not bend the concept of the best interests of the child towards children. Because many courts have said that children need a parent, need their father, and so we should not keep children distant from their fathers. But so it's much better to keep a distance or no contact between the accused and the child until the criminal investigation has been completed, because this is a much lower risk than the risk alienation. In other words, we need welfare offices, youth units and family courts that apply the Istanbul Convention and the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, because it's not acceptable that an even temporary break in a contact with a dangerous parent is considered a more serious threat to the well-being of a child than the danger of being exposed to sexualized violence. So the family law decisions must not override or undermine danger prevention, criminal prosecution. As I said, sexualized violence towards the child is a child alienation because of that shared secret. And it's much better to keep no contact until the criminal investigation is completed. In Germany, there are a lot of youth units who still maintain that domestic violence against the other parent is not to be considered as a risk for children, and so no measures are being taken to fight against domestic violence in the framework of children alienation. So I think this has also been I think there are 2 position papers that have been published and that are available at DPT. So I think these documents are available. If not, you can write an email to me, becker@kindervertretung.de. And if you need, so you can receive the position paper of the Kinderhilfe that was also submitted to the government. And this is a topic now being discussed in the government, and we hope in the future we will be able to have a more balanced set of verdicts by the family courts. Thank you very much for your attention.